We've been working in voice really since day one. We literally had the first branded skill that was on Alexa's platform from day one. I think that was us and CatFax. I think those were the first two skills on the platform. But we saw the potential of voice essentially from day one. Everyone at this conference talked about how voice is our natural interface. It's not surprising that people wanted it to be a thing for a really long time. Now that the tech is finally to a place that is beginning to be mature enough that you can actually do things with it, as soon as that happened, we're like, well, we got to get on voice. We actually have some prototypes we did 5, 6, 7 years ago that were exploring voice as an interaction just as prototypes. And so the fact that big tech is enabling sort of easier creation, it's an obvious sort of place to go. And in fact, something that we found to be true within voice is that when voice does its job well, it takes over previous modalities. And so voice is this very essential interaction and something that we've been excited about before Alexa, after Alexa, and into the future. Everybody mentions the obvious of like asking Alexa what's the weather, that does that well. Yeah, okay, fine, sure. But what we found is that the data is very clear that people who ask Alexa for the weather, they don't go back to weather apps and they sure as hell don't wait for the weather channel. It becomes the preferred modality, so that's obvious. What's less obvious would be like the work that we've done with the NFL and their fantasy sports platform. We created a supplemental experience. And what we found is that people who interact with that skill, they stopped going to the site. It became the preferred modality. When voice does its job well, it tends to take over. All roads lead to voice when it's done well. And we advise brands to find assistive moments. No, go, buy, do. Those tiny little assistive moments along the consumer journey, super service that and know that it'll take over. And I've seen this among a myriad of sort of examples. My biggest challenge is helping people imagine voice is bigger than a speaker. We all know that the adoption of speakers is what it is, 100 million, 125 million, 100 whatever million. It's adopting faster than a smartphone. Okay, all good. Irrelevant. Like voice is a new behavior. And back to all roads lead to voice, you're seeing this whenever voice is included natively within an app, it becomes a preferred modality. Again, including voice natively in Starbucks app, it's becoming the preferred modality. There's a reason, all the projections you've heard around voice, they say half of all searches can be done through voice. The part they leave out is that's in China. And in China, that's essentially true. And you say, well, we'll never get there. Really? Because in the States, we know that of mobile, 30% of mobile search is done through voice. We're following the same sort of trend line. So our job every day is to realize that there are cascading implications of talking to technology that is so much bigger. It transcends a speaker in a kitchen, and it's ubiquitous and everywhere, and it changes the way you interact with literally everything. I think the biggest problems I see with voice basically is that there's a tendency with emerging technologies to cram the previous technology into the new. And we see this all the time. You saw this back in the days with radio, by the way. The first 10 years of radio ads, you see this in the history of television ads. The first 10 years of television ads were written by radio guys. Accordingly, when you look at the sort of sponsorships that's happened, they didn't know what to do with their hands. They're holding products because I don't know what to do. So they're kind of holding it up. This isn't radio. It's got a screen on it. And it wasn't until there was a car ad on the beach driving, doing donuts with rock and roll, you're like, oh, that's what TV is, and there was this inflection point where now it became a meaningful sort of interaction. And I think we need that moment in voice. I think up until now, with a few exceptions, but a lot of people are basically trying to cram websites into voice experiences. They're trying to cram mobile into voice experiences. They're not finding assistive moments. They're just trying to force fit what came before it into a thing that's not really suited for it. So I think once we lean into the affordances and limitations of what voice does really well, and try not to do what it doesn't do well, that's probably the biggest problem I have right now with voices, is using voice for what it does well. Some of the most common misconceptions people have about conversational experiences in AI is that it's amazing to me how many people still look at it as a broadcast sort of interface. Voice is a two-way street. Voice is a conversation, and by listening is actually how you know how to respond. If we're talking, I realize you're not into what I'm saying, I'm going to kind of change up my tactic. And I think that sentiment layer that is had in a real conversation is often missing in the sort of robotic nature of utterances and intents, but actually having a human conversation. Incredibly quantitatively richer insights are had when you listen.